They called it the crime of the century, but what if it was something far darker? A ritual masked as justice, a tragedy engineered not just to break a family, but to control a nation. The kidnapping and murder of Charles Lindbergh's infant son was no ordinary crime. It was the opening move in a psychological war waged in plain sight. In this story, every headline was a weapon, every suspect a pawn, and the truth buried beneath layers of fear and manipulation. What you're about to hear isn't just a tale of loss, it's a descent into forbidden history, a sinister tale of power, deception, and the machinery of control that still shapes our world today. This is the Lindbergh Kidnapping Thriller Case, and once you know what really happened, there's no going back. They say some truths are too dark to see in the light, that what happened on a cold March night in 1932 wasn't just a kidnapping, it was a carefully orchestrated ritual of fear, control, and power. The world saw a grieving father, a missing child, and a nation on its knees. But behind the headlines, behind the courtroom, behind the body in the woods, there was something else. A silence louder than any scream. Because on that night the son of America's most celebrated hero vanished from his crib without a sound. And when the ransom note was found, it wasn't just a demand for money. It was a signature, a symbol, a mark of those who operate in shadows, where justice is a tool and innocence is just another piece on the board. This is the Lindbergh kidnapping, but you've never heard it like this. Charles Lindbergh, the golden boy of the sky, the man who flew solo across the Atlantic, hailed as the savior of modern America. He wasn't just a pilot, he was mythic, untouchable. But in 1932, something reached into his perfect life and tore it apart. His 20-month-old son, Charles Jr., was taken from his crib in the dead of night. No forced entry, no witnesses, just a crude ransom note, a shattered ladder, and a blanket left behind like a signature of death. Within hours the world knew. But what they didn't know, what they still don't know, is that this crime didn't begin that night. No, it was a storm decades in the making, and Charles Lindbergh was never the target, his son was. As lawmen stumbled over footprints and shattered wood, something darker took root. The media called it the crime of the century, but the real crime was what they didn't report. Why were there no adult fingerprints in the nursery? Not even Lindbergh's or his wife's? Why did the ladder show professional woodworking but flawed construction, as if built to fail? And then there was the note. Misspelled, broken, English signed not with a name, but a symbol. 2 blue circles, 1 red, 3 punctures. This wasn't As police swarmed Highfield's Lindbergh's estate, hundreds of people arrived. Reporters, gawkers, and powerful men in uniform. Military colonels, Wall Street lawyers, men with connections that reached beyond borders. Only one had law enforcement experience. The rest? They were there for something else. And Lindbergh welcomed them. He brought in mob contacts, gangsters and fixers from speakeasies like Salvi Spitali and Irving Bitts to negotiate. Even Al Capone offered help, from prison. Why? Why would America's hero bring criminals into his home? Because Lindbergh didn't trust the system. Or perhaps he was part of a different one that doesn't rely on law, one that deals in fear, in influence, in secrets. And as he orchestrated the chaos, the truth slipped further into the dark. Days turned into weeks. Letters arrived, each marked with that same cryptic symbol. Demands escalated. The child, they said, was alive, in gut care. Then a new player emerged. John Condon, a retired teacher, stepped forward with a bizarre offer, $1,000 if the kidnappers gave the baby to a Catholic priest. Suddenly, the kidnappers contacted him, called him Jafsy, and Lindbergh agreed. Think about that. A national tragedy, controlled by a school teacher and an aviator, meeting shadowy figures in cemeteries, paying ransoms in the night. No police, no oversight, just whispers in the dark. Condon met John, a man who stayed hidden in the shadows, who spoke with a foreign accent, and who delivered a chilling line, "Would I burn if the package were dead?" On March 16th, a child's sleeping suit arrived in the mail. It belonged to Charles Jr., confirmed by the nurse who had made it with her own hands. It was proof the kidnappers had the baby. Or had him. Because by now this wasn't about a return. It was a game of control, power, and psychological warfare. On April 1st, another letter came. It was time for the ransom to be paid. Lindbergh and Condon met again with John in a desolate cemetery. There, in darkness, they exchanged $50,000 for a promise, a lie, that the baby was safe, in the care of two innocent women. But no child was returned. And for over a month there was silence. Until May 12th, when a truck driver pulled over near a grove of trees just miles from the Lindbergh estate. What he found was not just a body, it was a message. The decomposed corpse of a toddler, face unrecognizable, bones fractured, scavenged by animals. The skull had been shattered. No ransom, no rescue, just death. And a nation was forced to confront something it wasn't prepared to face, the possibility that this was never a kidnapping for money. It was something else, something darker. The body was cremated almost immediately at Lindbergh's insistence, evidence destroyed, no further examination, no chance of a second opinion. And in the months that followed, suspicion began to spread, not among the public but within the investigation. One of the Lindbergh household staff, Violet Sharp, gave conflicting stories about her whereabouts the night of the kidnapping. When she was scheduled for her fourth interrogation, she panicked and took her own life by drinking poison. Cyanide, instant death. Her alibi was later confirmed, but the damage was done. Another loose end tied off. Meanwhile, Condon, the teacher turned intermediary, refused to let the case die. He chased shadows through the streets of New York, claiming to spot Cemetery John, ordering G-buses to stop, demanding the world watch his every move. He even turned the tragedy into performance, appearing in vaudeville acts, publishing his story in magazines. What was this all really about? Justice, fame, or something more sinister, a manipulation of public grief, a theater of pain staged to keep people distracted from the real players behind the curtain. As months turned to years, the case grew cold, but the ransom bills were still out there. Serial numbers recorded, gold certificates that would soon be withdrawn from circulation. The government prepared a list, a pamphlet of numbers, and distributed 250,000 copies to banks and businesses. The hunt began. Slowly, the bills resurfaced, a few here, a few there. Chicago, Minneapolis, New York. Until one day, a man walked into a Manhattan bank and exchanged $2,980 in gold certificates, ransom bills. He gave a name, J.J. Faulkner, an address, but the name was fake. The trail dead, or so it seemed. But fate intervened again. A bank teller noticed a gold certificate with something unusual. A license plate number scrawled on its margin, traced to a gas station. The attendant had written it down, sensing something off about the man who gave him the bill. That plate led to one man, Bruno Richard Hauptmann, a German immigrant living in the Bronx. A man with no job, no income, but thousands in cash hidden in his garage. The question now wasn't just if he was guilty, but what he really knew. When police descended on Hauptmann's modest home in the Bronx, what they uncovered was more than incriminating. It was explosive. Hidden inside a garage loft, they found a suitcase. Inside, over $14,000 of the Lindbergh ransom money, still bundled, still bearing the same serial numbers. In Hauptmann's pocket, a single $20 gold certificate, also linked to the ransom, but the money was just the beginning. In his attic, they discovered a plank of wood. Investigators compared it to the ladder used in the kidnapping, and what they found was impossible to ignore. The grain, the nails, the cut, it all matched. Not just the type of wood, but the exact piece, as if Hauptmann had torn part of his own attic apart to build the ladder of death. He claimed innocence, claimed the money belonged to a man named Isidore F. Ish, a now-dead business partner who had fled to Germany months earlier. Fish, he said, had owed him money and had left the suitcase behind. Convenient, unprovable. Fish couldn't defend himself, couldn't testify. But the evidence mounted. A notebook with a ladder sketch, Condon's name and phone number written on a closet wall, and the gold certificates spent by Hauptmann across the city, tracing a dark map that led directly to his door. The noose was tightening. But the trial began in January 1935. Flemington, New Jersey became the eye of a media hurricane. Reporters from around the world flooded in. Every hotel booked, every room taken. People wanted blood, justice, closure. But what they got was something far more unsettling. The state presented a case built on circumstantial evidence, but powerful, haunting, undeniable. 8 handwriting experts testified that the ransom notes matched Hauptmann's writing. The ladder wood, proven to come from his attic. Condon's address in his home. The ransom money in his possession. His fingerprints. Nowhere. Not on the ladder. Not on the ransom notes. Not in the nursery. And that absence screamed louder than any confession. The defense argued it was all too neat. Too perfect. That no one could have pulled off this crime alone. That Hauptmann was a pawn in a much bigger game. But in a trial driven by emotion, by grief, by the desire to see someone punished, Hauptmann never stood a chance. The jury took 11 hours. The verdict, guilty. Sentence, death. But even then, the darkness wasn't finished. Because what came next revealed how deeply the rot had spread. How far the reach of those in power truly went to silence dissent, to bury questions, and to erase anything that didn't fit the narrative. Bruno Richard Hauptmann sat on death row, insisting he was innocent. Outside his cell, the machinery of the state moved swiftly, appeals denied, deadlines set. But New Jersey's Governor Harold Hoffman wasn't satisfied. He visited Hauptmann in secret, bringing a German-speaking stenographer to capture every word. Hoffman believed something was off, that the truth was buried under pressure, media frenzy, and political ambition. He ordered a new investigation, not to save Hauptmann, but to uncover who else might be involved. Because even Hoffman couldn't believe one man had pulled this off alone. Ransom note, mailed across cities. Gold certificates laundered through New York, a child taken without a trace. It reeked of organization, of coordination. Yet the system demanded closure, not answers. On March 27, 1936, as execution loomed, Hoffman considered a second reprieve. Pressure mounted. Newspapers screamed for blood. Then, a bizarre twist. An attorney named Paul Wendell confessed to the crime. Suddenly, the execution paused. But within days, the grand jury dismissed Wendell's story, claiming no charges would be filed. The final obstacle removed. The path to execution. Now ask yourself, what really happened to Charles Lindbergh Jr.? A botched ransom, a murder gone wrong, or something far more disturbing, a cover-up orchestrated at the highest levels? Consider this. Why did Lindbergh, a man obsessed with order, take control of the investigation so completely? He kept police at arm's length, used gangsters as intermediaries, bypassed federal agencies. And when the body was found, he demanded instant cremation. No autopsy, no lingering questions, just ashes. Evidence gone forever. Why? What was he afraid would be discovered? Some researchers whisper that Lindbergh's obsession with eugenics, a belief in genetic purity, might have played a role. Was the child sick, deformed, a secret to be hidden at all costs? Or was the boy used, offered, in a game of power, sacrifice, and elite manipulation? The truth may never surface. But one thing is certain, the Lindbergh kidnapping was never just a crime. It was a message. And if you're still with me, comment this phrase twice to lock in your transformation. The hidden rule remains. That's right, the hidden rule remains. Let's push this truth into the light, because what happened in 1932 didn't end with Hauptmann's death. It began there. The descent isn't over, it's only just begun. In the shadows of power, some names become sacred, untouchable, and Lindbergh was one of them. A national hero, a symbol of progress and triumph. But what the world didn't know, what they were never meant to know, is that Lindbergh was not just a man of the skies. He was a man obsessed with legacy, control, and perfection. He surrounded himself with men of influence, military officers, politicians, industrialists. After the tragedy, he withdrew from public life, but not from power. Behind closed doors, he began associating with figures who believed in shaping humanity's future, not through compassion, but through cold, calculated control. He wrote about eugenics, about genetic superiority, and about the need to preserve certain bloodlines. The death of his son became a catalyst, a personal apocalypse that transformed him from a hero into something else. And it begs the question, did Lindbergh's obsession lead him to orchestrate the very crime that defined him? Did he seek to erase a flaw from his perfect legacy? Or was he manipulated by forces greater than himself, offered protection in exchange for silence? The truth lies buried in government files, sealed testimonies, and vanished evidence. Let's look at the evidence that didn't make headlines. Why were there no adult fingerprints in the child's room, not even those of Lindbergh himself or his wife? How could a kidnapper remove a child, climb down a window with a broken ladder, and leave without a trace, without a sound? And why, above all, did Lindbergh order the cremation of the body so swiftly, eliminating the only piece of evidence that could truly speak? Some theorists believe the child may have died earlier, and that the kidnapping was a staged event, a grand deception. Others argue the child was taken, not for ransom, but for something else. A dark ritual, an experiment, a message from one elite to another. The ladder, the notes, the symbols, they weren't mistakes. They were signatures. Ritual markings used by those who communicate not with words but with fear. The child's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a signal. A public execution disguised as a kidnapping, meant to show the limits of public power and the dominance of those who operate in the shadows. And we, like sheep, watched it unfold, never realizing we were part of the theater. Now follow the money, not just the ransom, but the silence it bought. $50,000 in gold certificates, carefully recorded, circulated like bait. Authorities claimed it was for tracking, but think deeper. Why use gold certificates at all when they were about to be recalled? Because every transaction was a test. Every bill spent was a breadcrumb in a maze of power. The man who exchanged nearly $3,000 in gold bills at a Manhattan bank gave a false name, J.J. Faulkner, a fake identity tied to a real address, one that hadn't been lived in for decades. It wasn't sloppy, it was intentional, a false lead designed to misdirect, to buy time, to confuse, and it worked. Until one mistake. A gas station attendant, suspicious of a nervous man, scribbled a license plate on a bill. That P late led to Bruno Richard Hauptmann, not a mastermind, not a kingpin, a carpenter with a criminal past in Germany, living modestly, working jobs, suddenly flush with thousands in cash. Did he steal it? Did he find it? Or did someone plant it? When they searched his attic, they found a wooden plank that matched the ladder, but the question isn't what they found. It's when. Evidence appeared as needed. Condon's phone number in a closet, ladder sketches in a notebook, gold bills in the garage, each piece locking Hauptmann into a narrative. But narratives are crafted. They are stories we're told to believe, and in this story the villain was clear. The Hauptmann never confessed, not under interrogation, not under the looming shadow of execution. He maintained one story. The money was left by Isidor Fisch, his business partner, now dead. Fisch, who fled to Germany and died poor of tuberculosis. Fisch, who allegedly left behind tens of thousands in ransom money, but had no means to pay for basic medical care. Implausible? Yes. Impossible? No. But Fisch's death was convenient. He couldn't speak, couldn't testify, couldn't reveal anything. And Hauptmann's trial unfolded not as a search for truth, but as a public spectacle, a stage play with a predetermined ending. 8 handwriting experts swore the ransom notes matched Hauptmann's script. His defense offered only one in rebuttal. Others refused unless paid thousands, and were dismissed. Evidence piled like stones, but none of it put Hauptmann in that nursery. No witness, no fingerprints, no trail, just money, and a story everyone wanted to believe. Because to admit uncertainty, to admit that the real culprits walked free, that someone else ordered that child's death, was unthinkable. The system needed a body. And Hauptmann was chosen. Whether guilty or innocent, he became a sacrifice to the altar of public order. The final days of Hauptmann's life were not just the end of a man, they were the end of inquiry. Governor Hoffman, now deeply entangled in the shadow web surrounding the case, urged for clemency, not because he believed Hauptmann was innocent, but because he knew something was wrong. He visited Hauptmann secretly, spoke with him in German, recorded every word. The result? No confession, no breakdown, just cold, unwavering denial. A man facing death without fear, without the collapse expected of a guilty soul. Hoffman ordered a new investigation. He declared publicly that this was not a one-man job, that others were involved. He even hinted at official misconduct, EVI. Dense mishandled, testimony manipulated, truth buried. And then something bizarre. Paul Wendell, a Trenton attorney, confessed to the crime. The media exploded. Was this the real kidnapper? Had justice erred? But within days, the grand jury dismissed Wendell's story. No charges, no delays. The execution clock resumed its tick. Hoffman considered another reprieve, but powerful voices silenced him. The press, the courts, the machinery of government, all aligned to ensure that Hauptmann died, and on April 3rd, 1936 he did. Electrocuted, silenced, ashes scattered. So what was it all for? Was it justice, or was it theater? Consider this. The entire nation had watched, captivated. The media dubbed it the crime of the century. But ask yourself, who controls that narrative? Who benefits from a population gripped by fear, consumed by scandal, distracted from the deeper rot eating through their institutions? Every headline about the trial was a veil, a screen. Behind it, the world shifted. Laws changed. The Federal Kidnapping Act was passed, giving unprecedented power to federal authorities to intervene across state lines. On the surface, a reaction to protect children. In reality, a tool of control. The Lindbergh case became the justification, the emotional fuel to ignite a legal transformation that few understood at the time. The state grew stronger, the people grew more compliant. Because fear is the most powerful lever of control, fear of the unknown, fear for our children, fear that monsters walk among us. But the real monsters wear suits, sit in office, craft stories, then punish those who ask the wrong questions. And in that fog of fear, one truth becomes clear. The Lindbergh case wasn't just a tragedy. It was a blueprint for manipulation, a masterclass in how to mold public opinion, steer justice, and bury the past under the weight of spectacle. And what of the symbols? The strange marks on the ransom note. 2 blue circles interlocked around a red one, pierced by holes. To most, meaningless. But to those who understand language beneath language, it speaks volumes. These are not the ramblings of an uneducated foreigner. These are signatures, esoteric, ritualistic, precise. The 3 circles, often linked to ancient orders, symbolize unity of power, blood, and silence. The holes, piercings of fate, openings where control is seized. This was no random design. It was a message sent to those who could read it, a declaration that this act, this sacrifice, had meaning beyond money. And it gets darker. That signature appears nowhere else in criminal history, as if it were crafted solely for this event, a one-time cipher for a one-time message. But who was the message for? Not the Lindberghs, not the police, not the public. It was for others. Those within the elite echelons who would understand its meaning, a mark of completion, a sign that the ritual had been fulfilled. And consider this. Why did no one, no expert, no investigator, publicly decode the symbol? Because to do so would require and in the years after the case, Lindbergh himself began to change. No longer the golden boy of aviation, he drifted into darker waters. Politics tainted with ideology, speeches that hinted at darker beliefs. He aligned himself with eugenics movements, praising regimes that sought genetic perfection. He toured Nazi Germany, received medals, spoke glowingly of their efficiency and order. A man once revered as America's hero, now aligned with some of history's darkest forces. Was this transformation born of grief? Or was it a revelation? Did the events of 1932 awaken something within him, a truth about power that he could no longer ignore? Or was the kidnapping itself a pivot, an initiation into a deeper world where morality bends and control reigns supreme? His public stances grew more extreme, his writings colder, more calculated. Lindbergh didn't just fall from grace, he stepped into the shadows, and those shadows followed him for the rest of his life, because once you enter that world, once you offer a piece of yourself to the altar of control, you never return the same. Lindbergh wasn't just a grieving father, he became something else. Something forged in tragedy and driven by an unrelenting need to control the chaos he once called fate. And what if the chaos was never random? What if the Lindbergh kidnapping was part of a pattern, a hidden architecture of ritualized crimes masked as personal tragedies? Think. How many times in history has a high-profile figure endured a public loss that seemed senseless yet resulted in sweeping changes to public perception, law, or power? These are not coincidences, these are designs, psychological operations where the masses are emotionally hijacked and their outrage harnessed. The Lindbergh case was not just about a child, it was about us, about how easily we can be manipulated by fear, driven to demand justice without proof and access, closure without truth. The media played its part perfectly. Headlines screamed of monsters and heroes. The narrative was tightly controlled, dissenting voices muted, alternative theories buried, and all the while the real story, the machinery of influence and control, kept turning unseen. Lindbergh's status guaranteed compliance. Who would question him? And when authorities needed a scapegoat, they had Hauptmann, a man with no voice, no resources, and no way to fight back. The trial became a spectacle, a public catharsis, but underneath it followed the legacy, not of the crime, but of the law it birthed. The Federal Kidnapping Act, known as the Little Lindbergh Law, was passed swiftly, almost too swiftly, giving the federal government sweeping new powers. It was hailed as protection, but it was more. It was a precedent, a legal wedge driven deep into the foundation of state sovereignty, enabling federal reach into local matters. All triggered by fear, by outrage, by a tragedy that captured the world. But ask yourself, who benefits when power centralizes? Who profits when the state gains the ability to reach across borders, across laws, into your life, your family? The Lindbergh kidnapping wasn't just a personal nightmare, it was a pivot point in American legal history. It showed the elite that a well-crafted tragedy could move mountains, pass laws, and condition the public to accept intrusion. And once accepted, that power is never returned. This is how control expands, not through force but through consent. Consent, born of terror, and all they need is one child, one headline, one orchestrated event to make the people beg for the chains they never realized were being forged. But the Lindbergh case didn't just shift laws, it rewired the collective mind. For the first time, America watched crime unfold live. Radio broadcasts, newspapers, public spectacles. It was a national obsession. Every detail consumed, every rumor magnified. The public became addicted to fear, to speculation, to narratives. And in that obsession, something sinister was born, the template, a method to captivate, control, and direct public energy wherever the elite needed it. Headlines weren't just reporting, they were programming. The victim's face became an icon, the suspect's face a monster, and through repetition, emotional fatigue set in. People wanted an end, needed a resolution. It didn't matter if the truth was clean, only that it was final. This is psychological warfare. Create a wound so deep that the masses will accept any salve, even if it's poison, even if it's a lie. The Lindbergh story wasn't merely covered, it was engineered to create maximum psychological impact. And it worked. From that day forward, crime reporting wasn't about justice, it was about control, about creating heroes, villains, and narratives that align with the interests of power. The child's death was real, but its use was deliberate. And in the shadows, those who orchestrate perception took note, because they had discovered a formula to command the public mind. And still, questions remain. Why were there no fingerprints in the nursery, not even from the family or nurse who admitted touching the window? Why was the ladder assembled incorrectly by someone with building experience? Why was evidence found after Hauptmann's arrest that just happened to perfectly align with the prosecution's story? These aren't just inconsistencies, they are anomalies, breaks in the illusion, and anomalies are where truth hides. Consider this. The police, desperate for answers, turned to organized crime for help. Lindbergh himself sanctioned intermediaries tied to the mob. Al Capone, from prison, offered assistance in exchange for freedom. Authorities denied him, but why did such men feel empowered to insert themselves? Because the lines between law, crime, and power are blurred, especially when the goal isn't justice but control. Every lead, every false confession, every public appeal was another layer of confusion, a fog of war designed to hide the core truth. Someone with access, with influence, orchestrated this. Someone who could slip through police scrutiny, manipulate evidence, and ensure that no real trail ever led back to them. Because in the realm of true power, visibility is weakness. The real orchestrators remain hidden, behind symbols, institutions, and the veil of tragedy. And let's speak of the ladder, crafted from inside Hauptmann's attic, they said, a perfect match down to the nail holes. But who found that wood? Who tested it? A government expert, a man whose entire career was on the line, the kind of man who doesn't just find evidence, he produces certainty. And certainty is the currency of manipulation. The ladder was more than a tool, it was a narrative device essential to proving the case. Without it, without that perfect match, Hauptmann's trial unravels. So they needed that match, and they found it in the attic of a man with no voice, no wealth, no defense against the weight of a desperate nation demanding closure. But ask yourself, how does someone disassemble a plank from their attic floor, unnoticed by their wife, unnoticed by anyone, and build a ladder with no fingerprints on it. A ladder abandoned at the crime scene with no trace of its creator. That's not negligence, that's impossibility. And impossibility is where manipulation hides. The ladder was either planted or built elsewhere by someone who knew what it would take to frame a man, someone who understood evidence not as truth, but as weapon. The ladder became the noose. Then there's John Condon, Jafsey, a retired schoolteacher turned celebrity investigator who somehow became the chosen intermediary in the most high-profile case of the century. Why him? Why would kidnappers trust a stranger to deliver their ransom? Why would Lindbergh, a man of influence, power, and resources, accept this man's involvement? Because Condon wasn't random. He was placed. A figure who appeared just when confusion peaked, who delivered the sleeping suit, who led Lindbergh to the fateful meeting in the cemetery. And at that meeting he couldn't see the man's face. Convenient. He couldn't verify the child was alive. Convenient. He received a note, a promise, a package, and then the child was dead. Not a rescue, a ransom, not a reunion, a diversion. Condon's story changed, his role blurred. He became a suspect, then a performer. Vaudeville shows, magazine deals, public adoration. The grieving teacher, now a celebrity. But no evidence ever tied him to the crime, except for his central role in delivering the money, receiving the notes, and guiding the investigation. So ask yourself, was Condon a dupe or a design? A pawn or a participant? Because in every great illusion, there's a distraction. And in this story, Condon was the hand that moved while the other hand buried the truth. And now we come to the corpse, the moment of grim finality. Found by chance, or so we're told, on a quiet road near Mount Rose, barely 4.5 miles from the Lindbergh home. The body was decomposed, scavenged by animals, and hastily buried, yet somehow it remained close, almost too close. Why would a kidnapper risk discovery by disposing of the body so nearby? The answer? They didn't. The body was placed there, later, strategically, to end the chaos, to close the loop. The autopsy revealed a fractured skull, a brutal death. But when did it happen? No one could say. The child had been dead for weeks, possibly from the night of the kidnapping itself. So why the ransom, the notes, the long chase if the child was already gone? Because the goal wasn't the child, it was the performance, the sleeping suit mailed to Condon, the demands, the cemetery meeting, all of it meaningless if the child was already dead. Which means the kidnappers lied, and not just to the family but to the world. The baby wasn't alive. He was already gone, already buried or hidden, while the ransom game unfolded. That's not a crime of desperation, that's a ritual. A script, a psychological operation, one designed to extract money, yes, but more importantly, to extract power. The power to... And what of Violet Sharp, the servant girl whose contradictions cost her everything? Under pressure, interrogated 4 times, she grew erratic, nervous, unstable, and just before her next questioning she swallowed cyanide and died. Police said it was guilt. The media said she was hiding something, but what if Violet knew too much? What if she saw something that night? A visitor, a conversation, a betrayal, something that made her a threat to the official story. Her death closed another chapter. The public sighed, one more suspect gone, one less question to ask. But it didn't end there. Her alibi was confirmed. She was innocent. And yet, the system broke her. This is how control works, not just by silencing opposition, but by creating fear in those who know. Violet became an example, a casualty of secrets, and in her silence the real orchestrators moved untouched, unseen. Because in every dark system there are pawns, sacrificed to protect the kings. And now, Hauptmann, the man beneath the noose, arrested not by coincidence but by pattern. Ransom bills traced to a gas station, a license plate scribbled in suspicion, and suddenly all eyes turned to a German immigrant, a carpenter with a criminal past. The perfect villain, not because of evidence but because of narrative necessity. When they searched his home, they didn't just find money, they found closure. $14,000 in ransom bills, Condon's number on a wall, a ladder sketch in a notebook, Evidence too perfect, too timely, like a scene staged for belief. And when questioned, beaten, kept awake, Hauptmann spoke of Fish, the man who gave him the money, the man now dead. Convenient. A ghost. A scapegoat. But no court wanted Fish. They wanted Hauptmann. His trial was spectacle, his defense a performance. Evidence stacked, experts lined up, public rage stoked. The press called it justice. But beneath the surface, doubt. No finger. But Governor Hoffmann wasn't convinced. He visited Hauptmann in secret alone with a German translator. Why? Because doubt had seeped into the halls of power. Hoffmann didn't declare him innocent, but he saw the cracks, the inconsistencies, the unanswered questions. He urged a deeper investigation, a pause before the final breath was stolen. But power resists pause. The court denied clemency. The public, fed on fear and fury, demanded blood. And so the machinery turned. Appeals exhausted, delays denied. And in April 1936, Hauptmann burned, executed in the electric chair. A man who never confessed. A man who may have been guilty, or may have been a sacrifice. Because in this world of shadowed truth, certainty is rare, but utility is not. Hauptmann's death ended the public storm, sealed the official story, and buried the deeper truths. But the real question isn't if Hauptmann did it. The question is why this case, why this child, why this moment in history was used to transform fear into power and tragedy into control. This wasn't just a crime, it was a ritual of manipulation, and we were all made to watch, believe, and obey. And beneath the ashes of that execution lies something deeper, something ancient. The use of ritualized death as public spectacle is not new. From the Colosseums of Rome to the gallows of medieval Europe, power has always used sacrifice as a tool of control. The Lindbergh case was no different. It was a modern execution, not just of a man, but of innocence itself. A child, symbol of purity, taken. A father, national hero, broken. A nation, captivated, subjugated. This wasn't about one family. It was about all families. A message, encoded in blood. You are not. And what became of Lindbergh? The man who once soared through the skies, now grounded by grief. But here's where the shadows deepen. Lindbergh didn't disappear. He transformed. No longer just a pilot, he became an agent of greater systems. He immersed himself in eugenics, in population control theories, in the machinery of elitist ideology. He met with global leaders, aligned with powerful interests, became a mouthpiece for ideas rooted not in liberty, but in dominance. His tragedy shaped his mind and shaped his mission. He once symbolized American courage, but in the wake of his son's death, he began to speak of order, of purity, of a world controlled for its own good. Was he broken, or was he recruited? Trauma can be a gateway, a way to remake a man, to turn his pain into purpose. Lindbergh's journey wasn't just one of grief, it was one of initiation. He became part of something larger, something that used his name, his loss, and his fame to influence policy, perception, and power. And in this transformation we see the ultimate goal, not just control of a case, but control of a narrative, of leaders, of nations. The death of a child gave birth to a machine. So now you see it. The Lindbergh kidnapping was never just about a child, a ladder, or a ransom note. It was the blueprint of control, a perfect storm of emotion, media manipulation, and power consolidation. The public watched a tragedy. But behind the curtain, forces moved pieces like a game where fear was the weapon and belief was the target. A nation's grief became the foundation for new authority. Evidence was manufactured, innocence ignored, and truth suppressed. Hauptmann's death closed the book, but only on the surface. Beneath it, the machinery of psychological control grew sharper, more efficient. What they learned in 1932 has been replicated, refined, and unleashed ever since. Public spectacle, emotios, Nile contagion, institutional manipulation, all cloaked in the illusion of justice. And Lindbergh himself, His transformation was not a fall from grace, it was a descent into the machine, into the realm where influence becomes instrument and pain becomes purpose. This case was a warning, but few heard it. Fewer understood, but you do now. You've walked the dark corridors, followed the hidden